Yes, and welcome back to the program this morning. It's just gone 8:38 in Johannesburg, South Africa, and it is the 17th of June 2020. Now, yesterday we commemorated and celebrated Youth Day in South Africa and remembered all of the fallen heroes of June 1976. And we also look at the hashtag Black Lives Matter and how it ties into all of this to help us understand, the correlation between the global movement now and our struggles in South Africa. I'm joined online by Mark Heywood in an article that he's to look at an article that he's entitled Black Children's Lives Matter. Good morning, Mark. Welcome to the program.
Good morning, and thank you for having me this morning.
All right. So you write about the importance of following and supporting the Black Lives Matter movement that has started out in the United States of America, but also the implications that it has for South Africans and how we need to contextualize it. What are the relations and what are our specific challenges that we are facing here?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that, all over South Africa, millions of people feel sympathy and solidarity with the protests in the United States and in other parts of the world. We abhor racism, and these protests have shown how unreformed and how prevalent racism still is in many of the developed countries of the world, and particularly police brutality. So that solidarity and our signs of solidarity is very, very important. But what I'm saying in the article is that even in a country like South Africa, which has a constitution that entrenches equality, that is meant to take us away from legalized racial inequality of the past, it's clear that black and white lives are not treated with the same value. And I think that perhaps the most evident area of this is in relation to children. And that's why I titled the article Black Children's Lives Matter in South Africa, because in South Africa, inequality is evident, particularly in education, but it's also evident in access to food, in the ability to develop as a child, in access to employment, in access to tertiary education. So I think that Black Lives Matter in the United States and other parts of the world should also be a call, a wake-up call to us in South Africa to reignite our struggle for equality of all people in this country, and particularly at this moment around children's access to education.
Look, Mark, we'll be talking about 26 years of democracy and of freedom that we are enjoying in South Africa. And I think we have a lot to be grateful for. But this pressure needs to perhaps be directed as well towards government, because ultimately that is where the decisions are being made and the lives of these children are being affected. Uh, how do we respond to government's lackluster attitude towards changing the lives of people truly on the ground?
Well, you're right. I mean, the first thing is that we have to call it out, and we have to say that it is a lackluster attitude. The government spends billions of rands. In fact, education, for example, is the largest part of the budget. And yet the quality of the education that black children in particular are getting is far worse than the quality of education that children who go to private schools. And of course, private schools, not exclusively white anymore, but there's still mostly white children who go to those schools. So racial inequality continues in our education system. But one of the things I'm, for example, drawing attention to is the fact that because of poverty and inequality, 10 million children almost depend upon schools, not just for their education, but for one square, solid, nutritious meal a day. And since the start of the lockdown, the National School Nutrition Program has been stopped, and 10 million children across our country have been denied that one basic meal. And as a consequence, many kids are now very hungry, are suffering malnutrition. And we have to join the dots. Malnutrition is not something that I suffer as a little boy or a little girl for a couple of weeks and then I get over it. Malnutrition has a long-term impact on children's development and on outcomes. So malnutrition directly connects to educational outcomes. If malnutrition disadvantages a child today, it may also disadvantage their results, their outcome in a decade's time. So it plays a role in deepening and entrenching the inequalities that we talk about. So I guess what I end up by saying in the article is that if we were prepared to take a hit to our economy that cost us 13 billion rand a day in the initial stages of the lockdown, then we should be prepared to take a hit to our economy. And I use hit in inverted commas. We should be prepared to positively invest now the amounts of money to make sure that all of our schools have toilets, they have electricity, they have enough classrooms, they have enough teachers, because education is a pathway to genuine equality and to genuine racial equality. COVID-19 is about inequality as much as it is about anything else, and it gives us a pathway out of inequality if we're prepared to go down that road.
Absolutely, South Africa facing a unique set of challenges, but like the knee on the neck of George Floyd triggered what we've seen in the United States right now. This type of schooling system, the poverty, the hunger, the inequalities, is actually the knee on the neck of South African learners on South Africa's future. And if the knee on George Floyd started off the protests and is possibly going to result in a turnaround of the United States society, it could have global ramifications. How long before you think South Africa goes through that phase of saying, we've moved past the talk stage. It's now time for real action and to change the actual system that we have in front of us. Are we heading in that direction?
Azhar, I think that's the million rand question, or the billion rand question, that we should be asking ourselves. What activists have shown in the United States, black activists, is that when their protests refuses to stick by the rules, when they say, we're sick of this knee on our neck, we are going out onto the streets, we're not going to abide by curfews, we're going to make our voices felt, we're going to propose alternatives, then the system is forced to make changes. I think that the education system and its outcomes in South Africa are intolerable. I think it's intolerable for poor black people to have to live in a society where they know that the chances for their children are stacked heavily against kids who come from more wealthy backgrounds. And that's why organizations of civil society, organizations like the Learners Organization, Equal Education, and so on, are so important. I believe that if change doesn't come fast, if change doesn't come this year, then we do need protest, and we do need protest that refuses to abide by the rules. Now, I'm not saying or advocating for violence or wanton disruption or burning of schools or communities, but you can have protest that makes a point and that refuses to be silent, that has an effect. And surely we are reaching that point. I mean, if you and I sit here today and we know that there are 10 million kids who are hungry, that is something that should make us very, very upset and angry, particularly in a country with a history like ours.
Mark Heywood, thank you so much for your time this morning and for sharing those insights with us. You were well.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.